She thought no one saw her, that she was just another bundle among the endless aisles of the supermarket. Her worn-out dress, the torn bags she carried as her only companion, everything made her seem invisible. But this day would be different, because when she walked through the door, carrying her groceries in those old bags that no longer served their purpose, she never imagined that the glances would not only judge her, but openly despise her. It was as if her presence made people uncomfortable, as if her humility was a sin in that place of bright lights and somewhat haughty faces. From the first moment she set foot among the shelves, that woman felt the coldness of rejection. A man in line stepped a little farther away, as if the space she occupied soiled the air. A woman pushing a cart full of goods looked at her with disdain and muttered something she couldn't quite hear, but the contempt was evident in her eyes. The employees hardly gave her a forced greeting, hurrying her along for no reason as she tried to organize her purchases. It was a scene where humility had no place, where appearances were the most valuable currency, and she, with those old bags and her somewhat messy hair, was the least valuable coin. And yet inside she carried more than anyone could imagine. But it was not just her appearance that provoked these reactions. There was also the rumor going around. A woman like her, so humble, so quiet, what was she doing in such a modern neighborhood supermarket? People wondered if she really belonged there, if she had enough money to buy all that, or if she was just a burden to the system. In that corner of the world, appearances mattered more than reality, and no one thought to stop and look beyond the surface. People spoke without meeting eyes, judged without knowing, and rejected without compassion. Nevertheless, the woman continued on her path with the calm of someone who knows the game all too well. Her steps were slow but steady, as if she knew the ending of that story had yet to be written. And as she moved ahead, the tension in the air seemed to grow. Murmurs turned into whispers. Eyes followed her with a mix of curiosity and disdain. That moment, so insignificant for many, would be the breaking point. Because she had something hidden, a secret that would turn indifference into awe, contempt into respect. Minutes passed, and the scene became more charged. A group of youths in the drinks section exchanged glances and mocking laughter as they referred to her. A businessman, checking his cell phone, pretended not to notice that the lady was using old cloth bags, the kind most would consider just wrinkled rags. But for her, they were a treasure. In that instant, the supermarket became a theater where everyone played their role, actors and onlookers in a story that seemed hopeless for the simple woman. But she was not seeking pity or sympathy. She was not there to be redeemed or for belated apologies. What was to come next would exceed any expectation, because when she finally reached the counter with that soft and trembling voice, no one could have imagined the impact of her words. It was then that all the silences were broken, and the sharp ear of the crowd caught what they never expected to hear. So much pretentious pride shattered in seconds, leaving only astonishment and a lesson no one would forget. Her name, which until that moment no one noticed, resounded with force. She was not an ordinary woman. She carried with her an honorable past, a story that had been buried under layers of prejudice and neglect. And in that instant, she lifted her head with dignity and with the strength of someone who does not ask permission to exist, revealed who she truly was. She revealed a secret that completely changed the perception of everyone who had ignored her, but it was not enough just to say it. Because the real surprise came after, when that wounded pride exposed the arrogance of those who had judged her. One by one, the faces that had thrown condescending glances transformed into looks of recognition, and some, ashamed, did not even know how to respond. The silence broke the banal routine of the supermarket and turned that commonplace space into the stage for an unforgettable moment. When she finished speaking, a wave of emotion swept through the room. There was sadness, yes, for the harm done. Also admiration for the strength of that woman. But above all, a great lesson about what truly matters. Because in a world dominated by images and labels, she showed that essence shines beyond the dress or the bag in one's hand. True wealth is measured in dignity and soul, not in expensive products or feigned appearances. Yet, amid that tense silence that seemed unbreakable, a man, the same one who had ignored her from the start, stepped forward. The crowd expected a reaction, a gesture of repentance, and he gave it. Slowly he lowered his gaze, then knelt in front of everyone in front of her. It was a small but powerful act, a symbol of understanding and respect that broke the invisible barriers that existed in that place. The woman, for the first time, felt that someone truly saw her, and just when they thought the story had come to its end, when the echo of that moment seemed to fade away, she spoke again. Not with resentment or sadness, but with a mixture of wisdom and hope that left everyone speechless. Because her last words were more than a simple declaration. They were a call for deep reflection, an invitation to look beyond the surface and accept that we all carry inside something that transcends any label. So, among broken bags and glances that were transformed, the humble woman became the center of a story no one expected. A story that changed not only that day in the supermarket, but left a latent seed of empathy and respect, an eternal reminder that true greatness is not measured by what we carry in our hands, but by the courage with which we walk through life. And in that unique instant, everyone learned that ignoring someone for their appearance is missing out on knowing an extraordinary soul. He ignored the woman with old bags at the supermarket, and then he knelt down when she spoke. Just like that, simple, unembellished. That's how that ordinary Sunday began at the busiest supermarket in the city. We all went in with our list in hand, in a hurry, checking prices, scanning for deals, but no one seemed to pay any attention to the lady who moved slowly through the aisles. Her hands were wrinkled, her back a little stooped, and she carried those faded, patched bags that any of us would envy for the secrets they could hold. Who could have imagined that she would become the center of a lesson no one would ever forget? From the very beginning, the woman was almost invisible. No one rushed to let her pass. No one offered a smile or a simple good morning. On the contrary, there were side glances, whispers, and even a certain coldness. A young man at the checkout muttered something inappropriate when he saw her worn-out bags, and another customer avoided her as if those bags could spread dust or weeds. It seemed as if the supermarket, such a familiar place, had turned into a showcase that harshly judged anyone who didn't fit in. But what mystery did this woman, whom everyone looked down upon, have to hide? She moved slowly, quietly, with an almost resigned calm. Every step of hers sparked either some people's curiosity or others' annoyance. But one thing was certain, no one knew who she really was. Until she finally broke her silence and spoke. That was the moment, right there in the busy rush, when the whole atmosphere changed. The woman stood still, looked around as if searching for someone's eyes in particular, and began to tell her story. And then, we were all left speechless. The supermarket turned into an impromptu stage where stories were woven in every corner. She spoke of her youth, of dreams that seemed distant now but once had it all. She told how life had taken unexpected turns, how those old bags were not a sign of poverty, but of respect for everything she had accumulated through years of work and sacrifice. She revealed that those bags carried things far more important than groceries. They carried memories, struggles, and an identity no one was seeing. Why had no one imagined that behind that humble figure there was someone extraordinary? Then came the moment that changed everything. In front of everyone, with a strong and steady voice, the woman revealed her name, and suddenly everyone stopped in their tracks. She wasn't just another lady dragging old bags. She was an iconic figure, a person with a legacy and much influence, whose story the world had simply ignored, reducing her to just an appearance. The whispers grew louder, confused glances were exchanged, and in an act that was both humble and powerful, she lowered her hands to the floor and knelt down, not in submission, but to remind us that behind every appearance lies a story worthy of respect. But what had motivated her to do this? Why did she choose that precise moment to reveal herself? The answer only raised more questions about our tendency to judge without knowing, about how quickly we dismiss others just by how they look or what they carry with them. It was a lesson no one expected to receive that day, one that echoed long after the lights went out and the supermarket closed its doors. Can you imagine what might have happened if someone had stopped to listen before? Tension built with every step as she told her life story, each word weighing heavier than the last. One by one, those present began to question their own behavior, each uncomfortable silence filling with an invisible weight. The lady's story was like a mirror, showing us our own flaws, our prejudices, our forgetfulness. How could we have been so blind? How much lies behind each person we pass in everyday life? And just when it seemed the story couldn't hold any more surprises, when everyone thought they understood, the woman delivered one final revelation that left the whole supermarket in a deathly silence. Her words brought on a silence as heavy as the shock itself, and that moment was key, because it revealed something even deeper, the real value of dignity and the strength in not letting others define who you are. It was that blend of humility and power that transformed that ordinary place, a simple supermarket, into a stage for humility, respect, and learning. But why did no one even suspect that behind those old bags was a woman capable of changing perspectives? The answer wasn't in her, but in all of us, in how quickly we judge, in how hurried our days are, in the empty gaze we so often cast at the world. The lady showed us that every bag, no matter how old or worn it may look, contains stories worth hearing. In that instant, before everyone's eyes, the invisible veil covering that woman vanished forever. As the story of that humble woman unfolded, the invisible barriers of prejudice that the supermarket had built up also began to crumble. It was a night of discoveries, of hidden confessions, of lessons burned deep into every heart present. What brought us to her? How was she able to endure so much disdain? More importantly, what would we do if one day we were the ones passing unnoticed? And as it turns out, that woman was not just someone with an incredible life story. She was a living reminder that we should never underestimate anyone based on appearances. That old bags do not mean garbage. They mean history. That true humility has a force we rarely recognize at first glance, and that sometimes a simple gesture, a word, a look, can change everything, even the way we see the world. So that day in the supermarket, every person learned a lesson without a footnote or a hasty conclusion. Everyone felt that strange mix of humiliation and admiration, of a respect born from surprise and remorse for having judged without asking. Because the woman with the old bags didn't just talk about her past. She talked about us, about what we are capable of when we let ignorance blind us, but it doesn't end there. There's still a question that lingers in the air. What would have happened if someone had listened to her sooner? If someone had seen beyond the bags and clothes? If that lady's dignity had been recognized without the need for dramatic revelations? The answer is still there, waiting to be found every time we meet someone different in a line, in a park, in a supermarket. Because in the end, what really matters is what's inside, not just what our eyes can see. And you, who are listening to this story, what is it teaching you? Will you dare to look beyond the next time someone walks past you with old bags or a plain appearance? Or will you keep ignoring stories that could change your life? The story isn't over, because we can still decide what to do with the power of our gaze. Will we stay blind, or will we wake up? Will we be part of the parade of ignorance, or part of the change that comes from listening and respect? The woman with the old bags didn't kneel just to surprise that supermarket full of strangers. She knelt to raise all of us up, to show us that true greatness doesn't depend on looks or fame, but rather on the strength every human being carries inside. And sometimes, when we least expect it, a humble figure can deliver a lesson in humility that echoes more powerfully than any scandal. In a world full of hurry and appearances, she reminded us that there are stories worth stopping to hear, that there are people who shouldn't be ignored, and that true wealth is in never ceasing to see with the heart, that invisible organ that turns words and gestures into something far more powerful than money or fame. Because what she revealed that day in the supermarket cannot be measured in coins, but in humanity, in the way she touched everyone, not by saying much, but simply by being herself. So, the next time you see someone with old bags, what will you choose to do? Ignore her or kneel down yourself, recognizing the dignity she deserves? In this story, as in life, the answer lies in the small decisions we make each day, and in the courage to listen to what seems invisible at first sight. He ignored the woman with old bags at the supermarket, and then kneeled when she spoke. This is how a story begins that many would have preferred not to witness, either out of discomfort, hurry, or simply fear of the unknown. But you are here, and that makes a difference, because this is much more than just the simple anecdote of a lady with worn-out bags and slow steps. This is the story of how rushed judgment can turn into the hardest and most extraordinary lesson. Who was that woman, really? And what led her to a place where everyone looked at her with contempt, without knowing she was about to change everything? Stay and listen until the end, because what happened in that supermarket left everyone speechless and proves that appearances are just a fragile veil, ready to fall at any moment. That afternoon, the supermarket was crowded as usual. It was a Friday when the sun was beginning to set and families were lining up to take home the week's groceries. Amid the white lights and tidy aisles, there was a woman who seemed to occupy little or no space for the others. It wasn't just her bags, old and patched up, nor the shawl covering her head like a half-worn veil. It was her discreet, almost invisible air. She walked slowly, with measured steps, as if every movement was an effort. Her clothes, clean but very simple, did not match the flow of modern, hurried shoppers. No one looked at her, much less smiled at her. She was ignored. Not a greeting, not a kind gesture, not even a "can I help you?" Nothing. It was as if she wasn't there, but that day, in that ordinary supermarket of an ordinary city, that lady was about to show something that would change everyone's perception. And above all, teach a lesson to those who judge without knowing. As she carefully put an apple in her cart, she heard the not-so-discreet whispers around her. "Look at those bags, they must be 10 years old. I bet she doesn't pay by card, probably wants something for free. Why doesn't she just leave already?" The words were invisible knives, but she remained silent, not responding to any of the murmurs. What no one knew was that she was not only gathering her groceries, but also a story that no one could ignore. At the checkout, the woman had to wait longer than the others. The cashier, a young man with headphones, barely looked at her and seemed annoyed by her slowness. Not because she was slow, but because her old bags and outdated appearance made him uncomfortable and, perhaps worse, indifferent. A couple of customers behind her started to complain in low voices, but she said nothing, just waited. Something in her gaze, however, seemed to hold the calm and dignity of someone who has lived much, beyond the noise and rush of the world. When her turn came, she put her hands in her pockets and, with a soft but firm voice, said something no one expected. "If you allow me a moment, I would like to tell you a story while I wait." There was an awkward silence. No one moved, not even the cashier, and then, in that second, something changed. She continued, "I'm not who you seem to see. My bags aren't old by choice, but because I have walked miles with them, because these mended hands have supported households and wiped away tears unseen by all. I did not come here to ask for help or to deserve pity, but to share something that might change the way you look at things." Her words began to weave a different atmosphere in the supermarket. The watchful stares started turning into curiosity. The quiet voices went silent. Some began to draw closer, and the woman began to tell her story. She spoke of a time when she was the director of a large company, a woman ahead of her time, who lost all her assets for standing up for workers and causes many disdained. She spoke of downfalls, exiles, broken dreams, and how, despite it all, she never lost faith in people. Her bags were not a symbol of poverty, but of resilience. Each patch a story of struggle, every stain on her shawl a scar with a name. And as she spoke, there was a spark in her eyes that could not be ignored. A child who had been playing nearby timidly approached and asked why she didn't have new things, why she didn't buy new bags. She smiled and told him something that stayed in everyone's mind, because the things that truly matter do not change with time. And some memories, when they are about struggle and love, are kept with pride, even if they look old to eyes that only see the surface. There was a tense silence, broken by the sigh of a man who was beginning to understand. She was not there to ask, but to teach. Suddenly, someone behind the counter recognized her name. A woman stepped forward, memories clicking into place. She recalled photos in newspapers, interviews, televised speeches. It was true. That humble, quiet lady, whom many had ignored for hours, was none other than a pioneer for social rights. A silent warrior who had changed laws, saved lives, and who, after an unjust fall, had chosen to live away from the spotlight in order not to lose her essence. The entire supermarket seemed to hold its breath. The young cashier, worried at first about a simple transaction, knelt down without realizing it, not out of duty, but from pure respect for the woman before him. She raised her hand gently and said, "I don't need that. All I wish is that you remember that behind every face, no matter how simple or humble it may seem, there is a story worth hearing before being dismissed." At that moment, the atmosphere changed forever. The old bags were no longer an obstacle, but became living symbols of a struggle few had known. The woman was no longer invisible. She became an inspiration. And to you who are listening to this story, now you know that the next time you see something that seems old or insignificant, think twice before looking away, because behind it, there could be someone just waiting for you to let them share their truth. She walked slowly, almost dragging her feet, with those old bags that seemed to have seen better days, and a worn coat that barely protected her from the cold. In the supermarket, her presence went unnoticed, or worse, was ignored with an indifference that hurt more than loneliness itself. No one looked her in the eye. No one offered her a smile. There was only a constant murmur of glances avoiding her, whispering judgments without even knowing her. It was curious how, in a place designed for interaction and togetherness, respect could vanish so quickly. People dodged her as if she were an uncomfortable shadow, an invisible obstacle in the aisle. She only asked for a bit of room for her clumsy steps, careful not to spill the old bag she carried. Yet every step she took echoed with scorn, and even so, her eyes shone with an inexplicable calm. She didn't seem to notice the rejection. Among shoppers with new, colorful, gleaming bags, her modest luggage looked like an anachronism from the past. Some children peeked curiously, asking their parents who that lady with the torn bag was, and the answers were quick, evasive whispers that marginalized her even more. The aisle supervisor quickly moved away if she approached, as if a simple brush could ruin his perfect day. She entered the fruit section, and there the silence grew even heavier. The apples gleamed, the oranges looked juicy, but her hands touched only a few, just enough to choose without drawing attention. Several glances were momentarily caught by the scene, but they quickly looked away, perhaps terrified by her simplicity or the shadow that seemed to follow her. Then something happened. Something nobody expected. A young woman waiting in line with her new cart slipped on a box fallen on the floor. She almost fell, and it was her, the woman with the old bags, who reacted first, holding her firmly and preventing the accident. Silence fell again, this time heavier, as everyone noticed how that woman, so ignored until that moment, had saved the young woman from a certain fall. The girl looked at her in surprise, as if for the first time her eyes could see beyond the coat and the bags, but it was not just an act of kindness. It was a gesture that began to break down the invisible barriers society had placed around that woman. Some started to look at her again, this time with different eyes, perhaps wondering what more there was behind those wrinkled bags and that humble gaze. She, without a word, continued on her way to the checkout, leaving a trail of restlessness in the air. As she approached the line, many began to whisper. Who is she? I've never seen her here before. It seems she lives nearby. No one knew what to say, and that only increased the intrigue. She took out her bags one by one carefully, and as she placed each item on the conveyor belt, she looked up for the first time and spoke with a calm but firm voice. That changed everything. They know me as the lady who comes with her old bags and humble clothes. But today, I want you to hear something different. Her voice echoed throughout the aisle. And suddenly, the usual bustle of the supermarket began to quiet down. Some drew nearer, others stayed where they were, but all were caught in the gravity of her words. She shared small anecdotes, details of a life no one suspected. She spoke of her daily struggles, of the days when she had to overcome not only the rejection of strangers, but also the inner storm that threatens anyone who believes they have no strength left. She narrated how, behind those used bags, there was a legacy that should inspire everyone, not just be wasted on indifferent looks. And then came the most shocking revelation. From among those words came an unexpected truth that left everyone speechless. "Before you judge me for what you see, you should know who I really am," she said, as she removed her worn coat to reveal a shining insignia on her chest that made more than one bow instantly. She was not just a humble woman. She was someone with a story that belied every prejudice. The supermarket had become an improvised theater, with spectators frozen and mute with emotion, trying to absorb what they had just witnessed. That woman, ignored and looked down upon, turned out to be much more than an anonymous figure. Her identity and her story changed everyone's perception in that instant. And even though many were still left speechless, there was no longer indifference in their eyes, but respect and admiration. But what more was there behind that revelation? Why had she decided to speak right there among strangers? That question hung in the air, like a silent invitation to look beyond appearances. The woman with the old bags had not only broken the ice, she had built a bridge to a truth no one had foreseen. And as she picked up her bags with a barely perceptible smile, the lesson was clear. Never underestimate those who seem invisible. The echo of her words could still be heard as people began to disperse, each with a story to tell and a new perspective in their hearts. And in the background, the humble lady walked away from the supermarket, leaving behind a trail of surprise and respect, like a shadow finally revealed, bringing light to what once seemed impossible. But the mystery, the one that kept everyone on edge, still pulsed. Who really was that woman? What stories did she still have yet to tell? Her every step toward the exit was sealing a chapter few would ever forget, because sometimes appearances are only a veil hiding enormous strength and dignity. And that afternoon, in any ordinary supermarket, the truth came to light, delivering a silent and powerful lesson that would resonate in every heart brave enough to listen. There was something about that lady that didn't fit in with the bustle of the supermarket. Something that made everyone glance at her sideways and hurry to move away. Imagine this. Old, faded bags that seemed to have lived many lives. Her clothes, simple and somewhat worn, barely able to hide the wrinkles left by time. And yet, no one realized that behind that nondescript appearance, she hid a powerful story, a truth that would completely change the way everyone there looked at her. From the start, people ignored her. Rushed customers, visibly uncomfortable employees. Even the cashier seemed to avoid looking at her. She moved slowly, with measured steps, as each person around her made every effort not to bump into her, not even with their eyes. It was as if this woman was invisible, or worse, an annoyance. Why could such a public, everyday place be so indifferent, so cruel? That was already a question hanging in the air. The scene was set in an ordinary supermarket, one of those we've all visited 1,000 times. The shelves full of products, the background music, the punctual voice from the loudspeaker announcing sales. But the real story wasn't in the discounts or the aisles, but in that small phenomenon that went unnoticed by everyone, except a few. Because she, the lady with the old bags, seemed to be carrying something more than just groceries in those weary hands, a dignity fading only in appearance. Ever since she walked in, her bags seemed to attract glares. People whispered, shrugged their shoulders, sometimes making comments that floated in the air, audible to whoever wanted to hear. Doesn't she know there are better bags? Loose dirty, a man in a tight suit looked at the scene with disdain and pulled his children aside, clearly unsettled by such a peculiar character. But no one imagined that this humiliation disguised as indifference was just the prelude to an unexpected twist. The woman, so humble and silent, strolled calmly down the aisles as the uncomfortable silence became almost tangible. She carried few things, yes, but something heavier, the invisibilizing judgment of all. She seemed to accept the disdain with a disconcerting patience. And that, how can I put it, generated both sadness and expectation. What story could justify such stoicism? Was she a resigned victim or someone holding a huge secret? The moment came when at the checkout everything seemed to hit rock bottom. The cashier, young and somewhat impatient, barely concealed his annoyance as she began to slowly take out each item. The old patched bags looked even more worn under the white store lights. "Are you sure you don't have a newer bag, ma'am?" He blurted with a fake smile, just a trace of condescension showing. The woman didn't answer right away. She looked at the employee, as if deciding how much truth to reveal and how to do it. And in that instant, the tension in the place stopped being just a feeling and became a palpable weight. Other customers began to watch. Some took the opportunity to check their watches, uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves, wondering whether it was worth getting involved. She gently bent her back, and in a way that seemed like a silent ritual, took out a card no one had seen before from one of her patched bags. She handed it to the cashier, who, confused, took it without fully understanding. And then the woman spoke, not with complaints or reproaches, but with a firm, clear voice that echoed through the place. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, and turned her gaze to everyone there, "I know what you're thinking. That I'm poor, that I don't deserve respect, that my bags are old and I have no worth, that I'm a bother. But you know what? This is what I have to show you." At that moment, the card gleamed with official identification. Someone from the press recognized the photo. The woman was none other than a renowned, award-winning doctor, a scientist whose discoveries had saved thousands of lives around the world. Her research changed paradigms. Her name appeared in prizes and theses, and yet here she was, in front of them, dressed like an ordinary woman, ignored as if she were nothing. Noise erupted, murmurs mixed with amazement and shame. The young cashier was frozen. The man in the suit who had pulled his children away just moments before came closer, visibly remorseful. The woman, however, continued, "I didn't come to this supermarket to impose anything or to be applauded. I came because I'm human. Because today I prefer that you see me just as I am, without embellishments or masks." The tension that had seemed unmovable began to evaporate, replaced by a mixture of admiration and deep reflection. The woman spoke of vulnerability, of appearances, of how respect should be the only real currency anywhere, whether in a laboratory or a supermarket aisle. At the end, a reverent silence left space for everyone in the supermarket to begin questioning not just their prejudice towards her, but towards all those different people they meet every day. The story of the lady with the old bags was not just an anecdote. It was a mirror no one could deny. And just when it seemed the day couldn't get any better, the man in the suit knelt before her, not with reproach, but with genuine respect. But the most powerful thing wasn't just that moment. It was what she achieved in just a few minutes, turning indifference into empathy, ignorance into knowledge, and humiliation into dignity. Who really was that woman? Why had she decided to be silent for so long? What other truths were sleeping inside each and every one of those old bags they had all so easily scorned? The answer lay not only within her, but within everyone who from that day on promised to look beyond the visible, beyond the surface. Because sometimes the least expected heroes carry the most worn-out bags. And her story was just beginning. No one pays attention to a woman carrying broken, worn-out bags, patched and stained. Bags that seem to tell stories of very hard days. That's how she goes, almost invisible, through the supermarket aisles. A humble lady, her back somewhat hunched and her hair a bit grey, dragging her old bags that squeak with every movement. People look at her, yes, but only to judge, to avoid, even to push their carts a little ahead and make their way without having to slow down. No one suspects that behind that simple appearance lies a secret capable of changing everything. She moves slowly, almost as if she were looking for something more than just discounted products. There are fleeting glances, whispers, and looks of disgust. Who would pay attention to her? Why doesn't she swap those bags for new ones? A contemptuous voice mutters. She's probably here for charity, always begging, mocks another. The supermarket employees barely greet her, even though they see her every day and know she always comes back with the same broken bags over and over again. To them, she's just another annoying visitor in their routine. But something changes when the woman reaches the aisle where the luxury items are. Some customers start to look at her with curiosity, and a couple move aside to give her space, uncomfortable that someone so humble is so close to the exclusive section. She smiles slightly, not with sadness, but with the serenity of someone who's got an ace up her sleeve. She makes no noise, doesn't interrupt, just continues on her way, unhurried. At the checkout, the same scene repeats. The cashier slowly ignores her, serving first those behind her. Her torn bags attract more attention than her face. A young woman frowns when she sees her place one of the patched bundles on the counter. Bundles that creak and ooze a story of years. How can she walk around with those things? She doesn't look clean or presentable, she mutters disdainfully. The tension in the air is palpable. Then something happens. The woman, without asking permission, begins to speak, and her voice is neither weak nor shy. It is firm, calm, and her words penetrate the supermarket's murmur. At first, only a few people turn, intrigued. Then more seem to pay attention. You can hear her story from the back, and little by little, the atmosphere changes, as if an invisible veil covering the place was suddenly torn away. She begins by telling who she really is, not just a poor old lady with old bags, but a woman who was once a powerful businesswoman, a silent benefactor and an invisible pioneer in her community. Stories no one imagined. Projects, foundations, scholarships, support, all those things she never wanted to show or boast about. Hidden beneath those bags that for her are much more than mere shopping containers. The faces that moments before had rejected her now start to show another emotion. Surprise, respect, perhaps guilt. The supermarket turns into a theater where humility and power intertwine unexpectedly. The tension repeats, this time with a new energy, because the question has changed. Why would someone with such impact on so many lives choose to hide behind such a modest appearance? Why was ignoring her the greatest mistake everyone made? At that moment, complete silence settles over the place. The woman kneels slowly, not to ask for anything, but to thank them for the opportunity to tell her truth. She does this with dignity, and with the same humility with which she entered, now transformed into a force that cannot be denied or ignored. There is no reproach in her words, only a profound lesson about the value of looking deeper, of not judging by appearances. When she opens the old bags in front of everyone, no garbage or waste comes out. There are documents, letters, photos, small symbols of her accomplishments, and the help she has given over the years. Each object is a silent testimony to her story. One by one, those present understand that this humble lady has been much more than a grey figure. She is the invisible heroine they had passed by without realizing. What happened next, no one will forget. Some knelt, not out of pity, but out of respect. Others came close to hug her, to apologize for having ignored her. The bags, once despised, became a symbol that true wealth is not visible on the surface. And that dignity resides in the most unexpected details. This story leaves us with something fundamental. We never know who walks beside us or what stories they carry in their soul. Ignoring someone because of their appearance can be the greatest mistake. Listening can change everything. And in that supermarket on that day, a humble woman with old bags changed not only her own destiny forever, but that of everyone who underestimated her. Now, tell me, what would you do if you met someone like her? Would you recognize her or look away as they did? Because sometimes true power is right in front of us, just waiting to be seen. They ignored the woman with the old bags as if she were invisible. In a supermarket full of bright lights and gleaming products, she walked slowly. Her bags, tattered and worn, seemed to speak of hard times, of long journeys and silent struggles. No one looked at her twice. Rather, they avoided her, as if a mirage would disappear at any moment. Customers judged her without words, never giving her the chance to even open her mouth. But there was a moment, just before she spoke, when the atmosphere changed completely. It all began with a simple cart full of fresh fruit and some gourmet items. Right beside her, a well-dressed man in an expensive suit watched her with a certain annoyance. His frown deepened when he noticed the worn, stained cloth bags the woman held tightly with both hands. Suddenly, the lady tripped over something small and fell to her knees on the cold floor. Most people looked away, uncomfortable, as if that could resolve the scene. But the man couldn't help but mutter something. That was when she, without raising her voice, caused a silence that swept through the whole supermarket. She spoke with relentless calm, but each word rang out with the force of a storm. Yes, these are my bags. They're not new, nor stylish, nor expensive. But each one carries a piece of my history. The glances, now filled with curiosity and surprise, began to settle on her. That humble woman, who until then had seemed invisible, began to show her power. And the best was yet to come. The mystery was simple yet complex at the same time. Who really was this woman who endured looks of contempt and mutterings? Why did such a simple detail as her old bags unleash so much judgment? The answer she had prepared would not only disarm prejudices, but would make the man in the elegant suit end up kneeling before everyone with an unexpected and almost reverent respect. In that supermarket, among stacked cans and boxes, a lesson was about to be learned that few would ever forget. From the very first moment, the lady seemed like just another figure in that everyday scene. She wore a weathered coat, mended shoes, and those bags that seemed to speak beyond words. She seemed oblivious to the looks that labeled her without knowing her, to the people who refused to wish her a good day, to the indifference that usually follows those who don't fit society's stereotypes. But her silence hid something much deeper, a past few could imagine, a story that would change the perception of everyone around her. The supermarket employees, used to passing customers, didn't bother to help her either. They greeted her in a mechanical tone, as if showing a bit of attention was a favor. Every time she reached out to ask for information or a recommendation, she received an automatic, cold reply. Yet it did not matter. She continued her slow and methodical path, as if every step was a link carrying her toward a crucial moment. At times, her eyes revealed a mixture of sadness and determination. Her slightly furrowed brows traced an invisible story. She was not just a woman with old bags. She was someone who carried more than objects in them. She bore memories, transformations, and a hidden purpose. The tension grew with each purchase, with every accidental crossing of glances. No one expected that something so simple could unleash a flood of emotion and impact. The man in the suit, for his part, represented the opposite. His arrogance and haughty stance intimidated those present. He muttered disparaging comments that others tried to hush. How can someone show up like this, with those bags in a place like this? Don't they deserve a little more care? He said in a low, complaining voice. But his words met a wall when she, unexpectedly, stopped in front of the supermarket magazine rack. She pulled out a small, very neat box, the only thing in her cart that appeared unworn. Then, with a firm voice, she began to speak. Her tale didn't just entertain, it enthralled everyone. She spoke of dreams that seemed forgotten, of a professional life where she had climbed impossible ranks, of sacrifices unseen because society prefers to ignore those who don't look perfect. This isn't just a cart with old bags, she said. Each piece of cloth here has quietly witnessed my daily struggle, a past you could never imagine. This coat doesn't hide who I am. It's my armor against a world that judges quickly and forgives slowly. The attendees began to draw near, attracted by her unpretentious confession. Her voice did not tremble. It was full of dignity and a kind of contained fury that commanded respect. The humble woman had exposed all those who, from their prejudices, had excluded her. Even the man in the suit, now less sure of himself, could not stay upright. He turned away, his words barely able to sustain his arrogance. However, the climax would come when she did the unexpected. With a calm that seemed to defy the audience itself, she revealed the truth. Decades earlier, she had been a renowned professional in the business world. She had risen to lead a multinational corporation, had changed lives with her decisions, and had been respected as a formidable leader. But for reasons no one could anticipate, she had chosen to step aside, to leave behind the glare and opulence, and to live a simple and anonymous life. Here I am in the most unexpected place, and I am still myself. I don't need to be seen in luxury. I carry all that inside me already. At that moment, the elegant man fell to his knees before her, not out of pity, but out of genuine respect. The crowd held its breath. No one expected that forgotten woman to become the most powerful protagonist of the moment. It wasn't the old bags that defined her, but her journey and courage. The entire supermarket became a stage where prejudices were demolished, where humility took center stage, and dignity shone brighter than any superficial label. But just when everyone thought the story had ended, the woman smiled with a gleam in her eye that announced there was much more to discover. It wasn't just a confession, but a challenge to look beyond appearances, to break free of quick labels, and to understand that each person carries a story that deserves to be heard. So in the middle of an ordinary supermarket, a lesson in humanity and respect was written that no one would ever forget. And there still lingered a question floating in the air. What would those people do now, the ones who had ignored and judged her so quickly? The story was just beginning. He ignored the woman with old bags at the supermarket. She walked slowly, with an almost invisible look, as if she wanted to go unnoticed. Yet there was something in her step that didn't fit with the modern hustle and bustle of that place. The lines were long, the carts full and shiny. Nevertheless, that lady carried old, patched bags, something that for many would have been a simple, overlooked detail. No one approached to help her. No one looked her in the eyes. It seemed as if time had left her behind, relegating her to a corner nobody wanted. The customers walked past, absorbed in their own rush, averting their eyes when she asked for a bit of attention, for the bare minimum of a response. "Can you tell me where the tomatoes are?" she asked in a slow, almost trembling voice, but the young woman at the register didn't even lift her gaze. The indifference weighed more than any bag she could carry. In the despair of that moment, she seemed invisible, an annoying bundle blocking the efficient rhythm of the supermarket. What secret did that woman hide that everyone ignored without knowing why? The scene grew more uncomfortable when a man approached and pushed her aside brusquely, complaining that her old cart and worn-out bags were in his way. She didn't reply. She just bowed her head humbly, gathered her things, and moved slowly toward the only register that was open. While she waited, a child stared at her with curiosity. She smiled at him shyly, and in that instant, something changed. That smile wasn't simple courtesy. It was a spark of life, a small sign that there was much more behind her appearance. Surely more than one person thought she was just another older person with money problems, perhaps a victim of social neglect. But when she finally reached the cashier, something happened. Not only did she speak calmly, but her words echoed clearly, despite the background noise. "Do you know that behind these old bags, a story might be hiding that nobody wants to hear?" she asked with no reproach in a sweet but firm voice. Silence fell on the line. The gazes returned to her. Who really was this woman? Why did everyone despise her for no reason? The whispers started to grow. Some customers exchanged bewildered glances, unable to understand what was happening. Even the supermarket staff looked confused, as if it was the first time they realized something important. She continued, almost without raising her voice, and suddenly that ordinary supermarket turned into the setting for an unexpected revelation. "Each one of these bags," she said while lifting them with care, "carries years of my life, memories you can't understand. Because when the world ignores you, you learn to survive in silence." Those around her felt a mix of compassion and renewed curiosity. That humble woman, dressed in modest clothes and carrying bags that seemed irrelevant, actually hid a past that seemed straight out of novels or movies. But no one could imagine its magnitude until she spoke her next sentence, the one that made even the toughest in their attempts to ignore her kneel before her, truly moved. She was not just any woman. She had been someone touched by history, by power, by decisions that changed lives and paths. And there, in the middle of the supermarket, facing indifference and contempt, she showed that all appearances are just that, appearances. The story was just beginning, and the best was yet to come. Who was this woman? What was she doing with those old bags? Why had the world forgotten her and chosen to judge? While the line watched in silence, the woman's novel unfolded, like a mystery yearning to be solved, with every word that left her lips. Eyes narrowed. Some felt shame, others sincerely wanted to know more. She, with her dignity and tact, stood up slowly, unhurried, and began to tell what no one would normally listen to. The scene was no longer that of an ordinary supermarket. It was a stage where the invisible had become visible, where judgment was turning into amazement. Nothing would be the same afterwards. And even though the clock kept ticking and the shopping around her continued, the attention in that place had frozen, trapped by the story that this woman, with her old bags, was about to reveal. As she did, one by one, prejudices began to fall, and with them the most powerful question: what would have happened if everyone had paid attention sooner? She took a deep breath, and then, in that barely audible whisper, which seemed more for herself than for everyone else, she asked for something that no one had given her that day: respect. At that moment, those present understood that many times you can miss the chance to truly know someone, because you only look at the surface. But the truth is, sometimes much deeper, hidden in bags that look old but actually hold stories that can change everything. And so, amid the confusion and growing emotion, the woman with old bags in the supermarket began to share a lesson no one would forget. Because that afternoon, humility ceased being invisible to become a force that disarmed pride and empty stares. Do you want to join me in discovering who she really is? What follows is a story that mixes pain and hope, shadow and light, and that will make you think twice before judging. The words became clearer, firmer, and the air grew heavy with anticipation. There, in that small yet grand moment, something priceless was hidden behind those bags that everyone despised. Only she knew, and now everyone was going to listen. Are you ready to discover it? This isn't just the story of a chance encounter. It's a reminder that we all carry more than it seems, and that sometimes the power lies in the most unexpected place. The woman had started to speak, and neither she nor anyone else there would ever be the same. What will she say next? Stay tuned, for the surprise is just beginning. They ignored the woman with old bags at the supermarket. No one stopped to help her, not even to look at her with a bit of empathy. It was as if she had gone unnoticed, an invisible shadow among the aisles filled with bright lights and carts loaded with shiny new things. But just when everyone decided that she didn't matter, she spoke. And what she said made more than one person kneel in silence, unable to believe what they had just heard. It all began on an ordinary afternoon in a downtown supermarket. The woman walked in slowly, as if dragging the weight of a past no one wanted to know about. Her worn clothes, her mended scarf, the aged plastic bags hanging from her arms seemed to tell another story. A story anyone might have ignored without a second thought. Customers dodged her, some frowned, others whispered to each other with looks of judgment disguised as indifference. She did not ask for help, nor did she try to draw attention. She simply walked slowly, head slightly bowed, toward the aisle of basic goods. But behind that humble and tired appearance was something much deeper, a secret few could have imagined. As she pretended not to notice the stares, her eyes calmly observed. There was no resentment, only a patience that could break through the thickest ice. The employees seemed annoyed by the slowness with which she selected each product, commenting among themselves in low voices, fully aware that they could be heard. Another customer, a young man in a hurry, inadvertently knocked a can to the floor. She bent down mechanically to pick it up. He didn't even apologize, just continued on his way. That's when the atmosphere changed. A small girl accompanying her, surely her granddaughter, took an apple from a box and with a shy smile offered it to the man who had pushed them. The simple, pure gesture left an awkward moment of silence. He stopped, as if for the first time noticing the woman and her companion. He didn't know what to say, and on his face appeared doubts he didn't yet know how to answer. The woman spoke with a clear voice, soft yet firm. It was not a plea nor a reproach. It was a phrase that disarmed everyone present. Not all the bags we carry tell our story, son, and not all glances see who we truly are. The words hung in the air, and for an instant the supermarket, which had been filled with noise, fell silent. Everyone looked at the woman with different attention, trying to understand the depth of her message. Little by little, she began to share parts of her life. She told how she had raised her children on her own, how time had tested her with illness and loss, but she also spoke of her constant fight to keep going without giving up. She talked about the old bag she carried, not only out of need, but as a symbol of a home she had built with her own hands, even if no one had recognized it before. There was hard work behind those wrinkles on her face, behind each small detail that might have seemed insignificant. The young man who had pushed her approached, genuinely moved. He apologized, not only for what had happened, but for the attitude he had had without thinking. Other customers, who at first had ignored her, began to ask questions, to listen more closely, to understand that behind that humility was an imposing dignity that no one should underestimate. But the story did not end there. The woman took something out of one of her bags, an object that surprised everyone. A small case, old but carefully preserved. When she opened it, it revealed not jewels nor money, but documents and photographs showing a life full of achievements and recognition. She was not just anyone or a marginal figure. She had been an award-winning teacher, a community leader, and a well-known writer in her time. Each person who had judged her by her appearance had to rethink who she really was before their eyes. She did not seek revenge or recognition. She only wanted to be understood, for them to see beyond the surface, to learn not to judge so quickly, because sometimes greatness hides behind the humblest wrappings. And when she raised her voice to conclude, with that firmness only given by years and truth, the entire supermarket felt a change. The murmurs turned into timid but sincere applause. Some stepped forward to offer help, others simply to thank her for the lesson they had just received. The woman, instead of showing pride, smiled with the humility of someone who knows that the greatest treasure is dignity, empathy, and the clear gaze we can learn to share with those who seem invisible. And so, before everyone, she made sure not only that they saw her, but that they would remember her. Because sometimes true worth isn't in what we carry, but in what we have lived through and how we choose to move forward. Next time someone sees a person with old bags or a humble appearance, maybe they will stop to listen. Because behind every story, there is a respect that deserves to be honored. He ignored the woman with old bags at the supermarket, and then knelt when she spoke. That phrase echoed in the minds of everyone present, with no one able to imagine what had really happened on that gray autumn day. The woman, with her slow gait and calm gaze, walked through the aisles of the local supermarket, stacking in her hands some bags that seemed more like survivors from another era. No one there seemed to notice her at all. Not a good morning, not even a courteous gesture. It was as if she was made of air, invisible, irrelevant. But beneath those old bags and that discreet appearance, there was a story hiding that was about to bring more than one person to their knees. From the moment she entered, the atmosphere seemed to close in around her. Eyes quickly looked away. Some people changed aisles, others sped up their step. Her humble, worn clothes were enough reason for many to judge her without blinking. Indifference was the most comfortable disguise for that social screen. Among shelves full of shiny new products, her faded bags told a different tale. Forgotten dreams, daily struggles, and an inner world no one took the time to discover. The tension grew as the woman moved slowly, searching for something or someone, but always avoiding eye contact. In her walk was a mix of resignation and hope, a delicate balance that made one wonder what kept her going, despite so much disdain. Suddenly, a child who watched her with curiosity timidly approached, but his mother quickly pulled him away with a whisper full of prejudice. That scene seemed small, but it hid the true essence of the conflict about to erupt in that supermarket. Minutes passed, and the murmurs grew. An elbow here, a glance there. The woman barely regrouped her things to move forward, until one of the clerks, with a fake smile, made a barely audible comment. "Maybe you should use new bags, so people take you seriously." The sentence floated in the air like a verdict no one expected to question. But then something changed. The woman raised her head slowly. The corners of the supermarket, which until then ignored her, filled with unexpected silence. She spoke, and with each word, the story everyone thought they knew began to unravel. Piece by piece, that soft but firm voice belonged to someone who had lived much more than simple trips to the supermarket. There were secrets buried behind those old bags, secrets few could have imagined. Her story began to weave a web of facts and emotions that unsettled the public. As she revealed who she really was, disbelief took on more tangible forms, from confused looks to nervous whispers, to people starting to wonder how they could have judged someone so deeply without knowing her at all. As her story unfolded, the tension escalated to the highest point of expectation. Every detail seemed to bring closer the moment when those who ignored her would have to face the reality they had always avoided. The bags now resting at her feet stopped being simple discarded objects and became symbols of a glorious past and an indisputable identity. Because what no one knew and what she was about to reveal was going to forever change the way that supermarket and its customers would see not only her, but also themselves. And then, before all those astonished faces and that dense silence, something magical happened. The woman knelt, not in submission, but with a gesture that no one present could explain at that moment. Why did she kneel? What did her action mean? The answer was in the words that continued to flow from her lips, in the truth she revealed with the quiet strength of someone who had already walked much harder roads than this one. But that's only the beginning. What happened next? The exact confessions and the reactions that shook the entire supermarket will leave you breathless. So if you thought judging was automatic and simple, wait until you hear what this humble woman, with her old bags and serene attitude, had to say. Because what seemed like an ordinary scene of ignorance and prejudice became a lesson in dignity, history, and respect that no one would ever forget. Do you want to know who she really was? The answer is closer than you think, and the story is just beginning.